Welcome. My name is Linda Ng, National President of OCA, Asian Pacific American Advocates. I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to all of you who are here for the second webinar of OCA National Conversation Series. We'll be presenting the series throughout the year in recognition and celebrations of OCA being founded 50 years ago in 1973. OCA's 50th anniversary is a time to join together and remind us of our rich history with a strong commitment to advocacy. How uplifting it would be then to engage our community and partners across the country with a series of conversations on issues and policies we dedicated ourselves to. This month's webinar is to recognize Women's History Month, acknowledging the fundamental role of women in American history, and in particular, the contributions that AAPI women have to our nation. Today, we have come together to celebrate AAPI Women Pioneers. You will hear from two of our distinguished AAPI women leaders from different backgrounds and experiences. These exceptional modern-day sheroes that have paved the way in their respective fields to open doors for AAPI women everywhere. That said, we are pleased to welcome Michelle Yan, our moderator. Michelle is an advocate whose writings on the intersection of Asian American identity, body image, and mental health have been featured in NBC News, CNN, In Style, Shondaland, and much more. Her memoirs, Phoenix Girl, How the Fact Asian with Bipolar Found Love, is forthcoming next year in 2024 from Fifth Avenue Press. You can find her on Instagram at Michelle Yan Writer. On top of all this, Michelle is also a former OCA intern. So here you are, Michelle.
Hi.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Linda, for that wonderful introduction. And hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us. I am also so proud to moderate this panel and be in conversation with these amazing leaders in our community. I owe so much to OCA National, which is one of the many reasons why I was so thrilled to be here today celebrating AAPI Women Pioneers. So it is my great honor this evening to introduce our two esteemed panelists. I'll start with Charlene Louie, who has a master's in education and educational leadership and completed doctoral courses in multicultural education and English as a second language. Charlene retired in July of 2021 after serving 20 years as the Director of Educational Equity at the Granite School District in Utah. She's also an adjunct instructor at Salt Lake Community College, Brigham Young University, and provides educational consulting. Charlene currently serves as the Executive Director of the National Association for Multicultural Education. Charlene is a strong advocate for equity, social justice, and advancement of multicultural education. She is a nationally certified senior level REACH, which stands for Respecting Ethnic and Cultural Heritage Trainer, and is a current ACLU of Utah board member. In addition, Charlene is on several boards involving the NHPI community. So thank you so much, Charlene, for being here. Can't wait to hear from you later. Thank you. And then I am also thrilled to introduce Kai-Ying Young. For more than 2 decades, Kai-Ying has been a social justice advocate who built and led community organizing, public policy engagement, and development efforts, locally, nationally, and globally. Since the mid-1990s, she has been a community organizer and executive manager providing social services and advocacy for the protection of refugees and immigrants for a number of organizations, including the Southeast Asia Resource Action Center in Washington, D.C. She was among the co-founders of several organizations such as the National Council of Asia Pacific and Asian Pacific Americans, National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, the Asian and Pacific Islander American Scholarship Fund, and advocated for the creation of the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. She is president of Red Green Rivers LLC and Kaiying Plus Community, a nonprofit management consulting group. Kaiying is a 2019 recipient of the Bush Foundation Fellowship. And in 2022, Kaiying was appointed to serve on President Biden's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. So welcome, Charlene and Kaiying. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. So impressed with all that you've accomplished and you continue to give to the AANHPI community. So with no further ado, I'd love to dive into our discussion. And so yeah, I'm going to start the questions off with Kaiying about unconventional career paths. Did you set out to be a social justice advocate? What inspired you to become a community organizer?
Actually, I got started very early on, Michelle. And first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to OCA National. And I'm so honored to be here today. I actually started very early on, and I did not even have the words, to describe what it was that I was trying to do. My family and I came to this country as refugees. I came when I was 7 years old, to Columbus, Ohio. And, as refugees, we had so many nonprofit organizations and volunteers and church groups that helped us. And so it was very natural for me that when I became better at speaking English and as a grown-up, that I wanted to give back to my community. But it really all started because in the 1980s, when I became aware of my own identity, I kept asking, who are refugees? Because I kept seeing on the news, the plight of Southeast Asian refugees that were pouring into the United States and especially to the Midwest. And I kept asking myself, like, why do they look like me? Why do I keep hearing about Hmong and Lao and Vietnamese refugees? Am I one of those, right? And so that was really what triggered me to think about why are there so many people coming to this country? And I wasn't learning about my history in my classrooms, in the spaces that I was at. I was in because we were also still struggling and trying to adjust to the United States. And so eventually, when I went to college, I learned about this refugee advocacy group in Washington, D.C. At that time, they were called the Indochina Resource Action Center, which later on became CRAC, the Southeast Asia Resource Action Center. And there I met so many advocates who were working to protect refugees who were not even in the United States yet. They were lingering in Southeast Asian refugee camps in places like Hong Kong or Malaysia or Thailand or the Philippines. And these advocates were Southeast Asians themselves, and they were doing such a wonderful job protecting those refugees, but also working very closely with the United States Department of State and making sure that the plight of refugees was not forgotten, and trying to get this country to admit more refugees to this country. So that's my first, introduction to the advocacy world and to serving and protecting refugees around the world. And so, I just became addicted to that and continued to maintain relationships with them so that I could continue to learn as I graduated from college.
Wow, thank you for that. Charlene, what about you? What inspired you to become a social justice advocate and fight for the advancement of multicultural education?
Yes, thank you, Michelle, for asking that. And once I do want to echo what Kaiying has said. Thank you for the honor. It's like when it says pioneers, it's like I'm really humbled about that. It's like I don't consider myself that, but then in retrospect, this is a great question because I grew up in Hawaii. And when I think about it, I didn't realize this, but I grew up in privilege. My father is a little bit of Hawaiian, but he is also his lineage is part of the missionaries who came over. So very white. And my mother is Hawaiian Chinese. And I didn't even realize at that time that my parents, when you think about it, shouldn't even have been married, right? Because of the laws of the land, and the interracial marriage. But growing up in Hawaii, I was very loved and valued, and I had no idea what the outside were. I didn't even realize when I graduated from high school, it was in 71. I didn't even realize the civil rights movement was going on. When I grew up, I guess, very sheltered. And then I wanted to experience and get away from the island, and go to college. And when I did, boy, was that a whole new world. I was not prepared for that. And in retrospect, I'm thinking my parents only allowed me to come up to Utah because of some religious, affiliations. And yet I think that might have, that helped me, I think, to be a little protected in a way. But then as I started going to college, learning all of this, a whole new world opened up to me, as far as I went to a Hawaiian school, a school for Hawaiians, Kamehameha schools in Hawaii, but they didn't teach me about my own history, so to speak. And I didn't realize we could sing our songs, but we couldn't officially learn the language because that was a law on the land, right? So things changed after I left. And now it's the renaissance of the language and culturally and everything. But I just found myself being away from my native space and who was I, and didn't feel comfortable because when I was just in this new environment. And so as I started finishing college and, a new mother, just wondering, what am I going to be doing? I didn't feel confident or whatever, but it wasn't until I started actually getting involved with the community and getting involved in education, and most importantly, other people noticing, and saying things like, I think you could do this, Charlene. Why don't you go and do this? Or so being out of my native space and away from the comfort level, it was so opportune for me and for others to recognize the talents that I didn't even recognize in myself, maybe at that time as a woman and as a woman of color, in a whole new environment and everything. But those are the things that helped me. And then there came a time too, where as I started getting into the social justice work, I had to go through a healing process myself, because then I realized I represented not only the colonizer, but the colonized. When you think of my family's, what my family was going through and everything, or had been, historically. So it was like a metamorphosis. I really went through a lot of changes and everything, but being entrenched within the educational world and being surrounded by people who are very passionate about what we're doing, I think that just continues to fuel me. And long story short, I guess, but that's why I'm still here and still in this space. As long as I can continue to give, I will. And as long as there's others who, what I've learned through this whole thing is that we're never alone, right? We're always in this together, and there's always others. I need others just as much as they might need my mana'o, or maybe some of an assistance from me as well. But I think that's kind of the unconventional part where I never really thought about it, but that's what's brought me here today.
Thank you so much for that really rich answer. Really appreciate that. I know that as a writer for different outlets, I sometimes get boxed in as an Asian writer. And I feel like my assignments mostly have to do with my Asianness. And it can feel like there's a ceiling or limits to what I can accomplish within the way that I'm perceived that way. So this time I would love for Charlene to start first, but if you can tell us about what challenges do you face as an AAPI woman in your field? Like, what is limiting? What have you done about it?
Well, I think, well, now because I'm at the kapuna stage, and you're much older, it's like, sometimes it's like, okay, you can do whatever you want to do, but, but I'm in a more confident place. But I think when I first started out, because I was living, we're in this world where looks are everything, right? So all the intersectionality as a woman, cisgender female, my pronouns are she, her, but then looking at all my ethnicities as well, and being in a very white centric environment, and everything, I was basically told, you're not going to ever be an administrator, one, because, well, you're a person of color. And there were so few at that time, and there still are few today. And oh, by the way, you're not the regular size that we would like. You know, I had somebody tell me they'll never hire you because you're too heavy. You know, so there's all these things that are coming at you, and you know, and as a woman, and a woman of color in this environment, it's like there can be a lot of daunting challenges for you to be in that space. And so, and then I remember when I did get the job as an administrator, the next thing it was, you only got it because, you know, we're in a lawsuit and we have to hire someone of color. So I
Wow.
just felt like I felt like I was always on the stage, so to speak, and that I had to do twice as much just to show that I was qualified. And you know, I'm grateful for affirmative action, you know, in certain arenas and everything, but by the same token, you know, I want to be known for my qualities as well, you know, and everything. And so I just felt at that time there were some challenges, but once they see who you are and they see your work, and then as you make connections and networking, for me, if I had to say anything to anyone, you've got to build up your network, you know, and build those relationships, because those relationships is will be what will get you through those hard times and those challenges. So, you know,
Yeah.
I think that for me, when I think back, those were some of my toughest things at the very beginning. And it's your own mindset. You have to go past that and realize, you know, that I am valuable. I'm a good person. I can do this.
Yeah,
I was
absolutely.
born to do this, you know.
Yes, yes. Kylie, what about you? Do you have anything to add to that about challenges you faced as an Asian woman in your field? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the challenges are both internal to my community and also externally, right? And so just to give a small background, I don't know how many people actually know who the Hmong Americans are, but we're an ethnic minority from the country of Laos. The 99% of us who live in this country are from the country of Laos, and we came after the Vietnam War ended. And so the Hmong American community has an oral tradition, and so you know, we lived in remote areas and in Southeast Asian countries, and it wasn't until we came to this country that we, women and men, had more access to education. So by that time I was 18 years old, most of the Hmong women were already married, and I was one of the few women that went to college. This isn't when I grew up in Colorado. And so that in itself, Charlene, was pioneering, even though I did not know it, right? And in fact, in my community, that was a failure because I didn't get married and have children. So I wasn't the epitome of success, although I knew that I could do more than getting married and having children, which I respect tremendously because I think that's also very challenging. But I went to college and decided to live in the dormitories. Already that was a challenge for my community and for my gender. I wasn't allowed to do that, but I wanted to do that because I knew that for some reason I already knew that education would help our community collectively, because we did come from an oral tradition and we didn't have people who had post-secondary education or even a high school degree in the 1980s. And so for me, I felt like it was very important to really try to pave that path, right? And like I said, I didn't have the words for it, but I eventually learned and had mentors who understood what I was going through. Then when I became the executive director of a small women's organization in Minnesota, I was only 25, and it's a Hmong women's organization. So I was challenged with, well, you don't even have a family. How could you be an advocate for families, right? And I said to them, well, I have a college degree. I can write grant proposals in English, and I know how to network with funders who you need to fund your organization. And so that's how I argued my way into being an executive director at that young age. And then when I went to Washington, D.C., where there were very few to no Hmong, or maybe 2 or 3 families in Virginia, I then had to help my other Asian American civil rights colleagues to understand who Southeast Asians were and who the Hmong were, and to not just demand, but to get invited to have a seat at the table with other Asian Americans. And so those are some of the challenges, I think, as ethnic minorities of Asian American groups, is that we are often trying to, get a seat at the table. Externally, I think I looked young at that time. When you're a young Asian woman, I think people just don't take you seriously, right? But I think because I'm first generation immigrant and refugee, so I was so the struggles of refugees and immigrants was very close to me. And I think that I just, embodied the passion to fight for my community. And so I didn't let that youth and the ignorance that I had stop me. Instead, I found a lot of mentors all around me who, like Charlene, was saying, you can do it because you speak English, we understand you, we can communicate with you. And so in some ways, I think being a young woman, kept me under the radar. And so I think people didn't fear me, but at the same time, I was able to get a lot of work done. And so in hindsight, I'm thinking now back to how did I ever survive Washington, D.C. in those days? It's because of all the mentors I had around me and people who actually believed in me and said, that's the path that we should be paving for a lot of people. And even though my parents were not so supportive, they also understood that as long as I'm not getting myself in trouble and making them lose face, it's okay, right? And so the losing face was a really big deal. And I just really wanted to make sure that I, was doing the right thing. And yes, I have people like Daphne and Karen Narasaki and Daphne Kwok and, all these great women all around me. And so without their permission, they became my role models and my mentors. And that's how I learned and became a staunch advocate just like them.
Thank you so much. Daphne Kwok is in the audience, I think, and she's a mentor and a role model for me as well. When I interned in 2001 in DC at OCA, she was she was the leaving executive director, and Christine Chen was the incoming, and both women, amazing role models. Since we got to share our role model, Charlene, would you like to share who your role models are and who inspires you in your work?
Well, I think a part of it, I have to go back to several, and one, of course, would be my own mother, who never graduated because of her age, the time that she was born, and the age of their birth or whatever. She was not the one that was that went to school. She went to a few years, but she went as far as I think 7th grade. And yet all of her children have graduated from college and have, terminal degree, things, other degrees and stuff. And I remember when she actually got her GED and we were so excited for her. So I have to think back to her as the example of wanting us to continue on and thinking about the humble circumstances. So she's one of my role models. But I also want to acknowledge a dear friend, Juanita Benioni. If she hadn't told me, I shouldn't be emotional, but I do, because these people are so important in your life, right? But if she hadn't turned around and said, you can do this, you should go do this, I probably wouldn't have even filled out the application, And then I think about another person would be my geometry teacher of all people, because and math is not, I am not strong in math or whatever, but whatever I did that day in class, she shared that with my parents, and she just said, I think I see in you a great educator. So it just takes, you never know. And I can remember what she wore that day when she told me that. And so those are the first impressions. And then every single day I find people around me that are sheroes, and even other heroes as well, that encourage and send you on, and keep you fighting the good fight, because it can be a hard thing, especially in today's world of in education with the divisive concept legislation. What can we say? What can't we say? Disparities, we see a lot of things out there, but I'm always hopeful that we've seen, when you get to be my age, you see the pendulum swing, we can do so many great things, and then pretty soon something happens and things change. But there's always hope, but it's only because we're all in this together, I think. So I could go on and on with people who have been instrumental, but thinking about those three, I want to honor them tonight.
That is a really inspiring answer. And you inspired me to I want to add a couple of writers that really inspire me too. My mentor is Grace Talusin, who wrote The Body Papers, a wonderful memoir. And also I recently met Putsata Riang, who wrote Ma and Me, amazing. She also has an amazing modern love story that kind of the memoir was able to be born out of that, about, you know, the refugee experience and then her life from that point forward. She's also a journalist and such an inspiration. So yeah, and so many sheroes around us, right? So many people that we can look to. So my next question is one that I get asked a lot, which is, what would you say to other women who are interested in working in your field? How do you get started? And, you know, like just how do you go about it? And my answer is usually just to do it. Don't let your fears or, you know, if you have imposter syndrome to hold you back, just to try. And even if you don't succeed at first, to not give up. But I'm curious what the two of you think, and if you have any more specific advice. And yeah, Kai-Ying, would you like to try to answer that first?
Yeah. So I spent most of my life in the nonprofit sector. When I lived abroad, I worked for a couple of international advocacy, development and migration organization. But by far, I love the nonprofit sector. I think this is where we have so much power to really focus a lot on our communities, whoever you define as your community there. And the nonprofit sector has really helped me develop my leadership skills and my vision for my collective community, whether it's the Hmong American community, the Southeast Asian American community, or the collective Asian American community. I know that I would never get that kind of opportunity anywhere else outside of the nonprofit sector. So first I want to say that I think people underestimate nonprofits and don't value the nonprofit sector the way that we should, right? Especially our parents. You know, my parents still don't understand what I do in the nonprofit sector, but I have, I think, made more impacts in the nonprofit sector than I have when I worked in the international development agencies. The second thing I would say to young people is that, you know, when you go into the nonprofit sector, you have to think of it as your contribution to the movement, right? Social justice movement, racial justice movement, the Asian American, you know, movement, and that your work is not going to have impact overnight. Although if you're really talented and just powerful, you can, but that the impact is going to happen, you know, within decades, right? And so not to have to be impatient, but to be patient and to really dedicate your life and your resources to the vision that others have created for us, right? And so I would say that that's probably one thing that I find that a lot of people think that going to the nonprofit sector is an employment. It's not an employment. It's really contributing to the social justice of Asian Americans or whoever your community is. I think that you know, it's also important to understand that when you are in the nonprofit sector, you are a leader. No matter what title you have, you are a leader. And the nonprofit sector that I have worked with always centers the community, and it's always at the intersection of community organizing and public policy. And I've been so privileged to work in that area, but it also means that I have to make sure that the network of communities and leaders that I work with are at the table with me and are participating actively in the civic engagement, you know, work that we do. And not just for me to always be out there to represent the communities, but that I'm only there to open the doors so that the communities can join and you know, be a voice for themselves. And so this part is really important. When you go to the nonprofit sector, you have to bring your whole self and your community and your network. That's your power, right? And if we don't do that, then it will just be a 9-to-5 job, and that you can get anywhere else. You don't have to go to a nonprofit sector to do it. But a nonprofit sector that is centered on community and social justice, you have to bring your whole self, and it's going to be for the long run.
Absolutely. How inspiring. Thank you. Charlene, what about you? What specific advice do you have someone who wants to, you know, break into your field?
Well, thank you. And I'm going to borrow some of Kai-Ying's as well with the nonprofit, because it seems like I started off in, well, formally in education, which is still a nonprofit, right? You know, and so I'm going to talk to that first. And why it wasn't so important for me is if you do the personality tests or whatever, my number one personality trait is a feeler, which can be good and bad, right? Because I care for people and everything, but sometimes a little bit too much emotion, so I have to rein that in. Sometimes when you get so passionate, you want to call somebody out, but I remember, I got to take it easy, and everything. But education, for me, always education is the key. I love what Nelson Mandela has always said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And so for me, it was almost like my why. And I think for all of us, no matter what we choose to do, we have to know our why. Why is it that we are doing this? And if we can't figure out our why, then my suggestion is maybe you're not in the right space at the right time. So we really need to be able to identify our why. And so for me, education was my why, and it still is. I think we're all educators in whatever area we're at. We're still educating and sharing our education with others, our knowledge. And I love the fact that the challenge to, when I was a principal at 3 different schools, the junior high and elementary, 3 different facilities or whatever. But while I was at that school, I had a dear friend, another mentor, who said, when I was asked to come to the district level, I thought, wow, why should I leave this community? Because I felt like I was making an impact and everything. But he also said to me, but Charlene, you have an impact over, 800 students and their families. But at the next level, if you're in the district at this 30,000-foot level, think of your sphere of influence. And so I think that has also guided me. Not that I feel like I have to be very careful, because I don't want to be culturally inappropriate to think that I'm all of this, because I'm not. But at some point in time too, it's just like Kaying, as she works at the federal level, making all of those decisions and being around the table. Once again, we're always thinking about our community. If what I do today can impact tomorrow, that's what we're doing this for. And so when I retired, I didn't have the 8 to 5, and it's never 8 to 5, right? When you're an administrator, it's 24/7 sometimes and everything. But then I was taken from a realm here, and now I'm in a nonprofit situation as executive director. And, it's a different world, and yet there's a lot of differences and yet a lot of similarities as well. But it's always, and I'm just going to echo again what Kaying said, it is social justice. It's activism, it's out there. And especially what I see sometimes is that we're the voice of those who are voiceless. And I do a lot with I'm also on the board for the National Tongan American Society here in Utah, which my husband was a founder. My late husband, he's been gone now for almost 5 years. But they started 30 years ago, he probably never realized it would now have offices in 3 other states. But, did it happen overnight? No, but it's our commitment and our passion in realizing that as long as we have that mission and the vision and the why, we will continue to do what we're doing. And we may not affect a lot of people, but I know for sure that we are affecting the lives of our community members and our nation as a whole. So.
Wow, so powerful. Thank you for that, Charlene. I'm going to save about 10 minutes at the end for questions. So if you have questions, please put it in the Q&A or in the chat box. And so, yeah, think of your questions and please keep them saved for the end. And then in the meantime, I'd love to get through 1 or 2 more questions. And yeah, I'm kind of interested. Has it ever been in your, long, powerful careers when someone said no to you, and what you did when someone said no to you to something that you really needed or wanted? Kaying, do you want to start?
Yeah, people say no to me all the time. But I think, I have to say that I don't want to romanticize the nonprofit sector. It was very challenging when I was living in DC as a young executive director. Every single time funders say no, I was sick to my stomach, because it was my responsibility to make sure that our organization had enough funding so that I could pay my staff, but also to continue to be strong advocates for my community at the national level. And so when you get a no from funders, I think that's the worst no that any nonprofit leaders could get. And then in the policy world, I mean, you get no's all the time from legislators. I was a lobbyist here in the St. Paul, Minnesota state capitol, and it's a really toxic environment, even though they say this is your house, this is your community, these are your legislators. There's so many people are expert lobbyists, so they're always at the Capitol asking for, policies and resources to help their communities. But legislators in that process, is always very negative, and that it's so easy for them to say no. And so you do need to really have strong strategies and communities at the Capitol asking legislators to do more for communities, right? And so even though we get a lot of no's, we've made, we've experienced, surprising victories as well too, when we work with bipartisan, legislators, and that the communities are at the Capitol asking for support. And so while the no's outnumber the yeses, the yeses are, triumphant when we do get it. And so I have to say that those are the experiences that I think are the hardest for me, is the funding. I think one piece that I wanted to add to Charlene here, as she talks about being the kapuna, is that, we are so good at respecting our elders and the men in our community that sometimes that backfires when we are at the table, because they're like, well, where are your elders and where are the men, right? And I'm always like, I'm doing the work here, they're benefiting from this. Or, I have to be very strategic to bring, our male leaders and our elders to the table too. And so just balancing that also helps, to figure out who says no to me, at what point do they say no, right? And who do I go to when I get so many, no's that I'm feeling really exhausted and burnt out? And I think that we don't talk enough about nonprofit leaders who get burnt out. And, you see other people going on sabbatical, and I'm like, well, I can't afford to go to sabbatical because I can't even pay for the staff, right? And so I think that the culture of the nonprofit sector has to change, and it has to include that healing, right? I think, Charlene, you talked a little bit about healing, or maybe in our prep talk, just that we need to create spaces where it's much more healing for our community leaders, especially women who have so many responsibilities already at home and then at work and for their community as a whole. So we're neglecting that. And I often say that millennials are the best leaders because they know about self-care. And I unfortunately have no idea what self-care is. I'm just learning in the last 3 years. And so I'm learning from my millennial friends to just take better care of myself. But I tell you, when we were working in DC and when I was a young executive director, I took work home all the time. And, even though now I feel like it was worth it, it was really hard at that time. So I'm sorry, I'm going around in a circle about no, but when you work that hard and people still say no to you, that's when it's really sad. That's what I'm trying to say, Michelle.
No, thank you. That was a great answer. Thank you. Charlene, what about you? Do people dare say no to you?
Oh, yeah. Yes. But I want to say to Kayang, this thing about self-care, I think we grew up in a generation where culturally we had to take care of the family, we had to do this and that and do everything else. And there was a lot of expectations too. So yeah, we neglected our own self-care. I often had a dear friend a boss who said, you fill everybody else's bucket, but you don't take the time to fill your own bucket, so I've learned that over the years too. But as far as people saying no, I have a couple of examples, experiences. So I'm always asking for something, in the education world or whatever, where I was the director, and it would be, well, I don't think, or, I don't really think that's going to work. And you have to remember, I'm a woman as well as a Native Asian Pacific Islander, except Native Hawaiian. So it's like, well, discredited almost, So I found that in order for me to make my case, I would have to put together the data or the research, and I have to show them you have to, well, just like everything else. But I think for sometimes, I don't know, Kaying, if you felt that way, we almost had to go over the top to make our case for this, And then even if they said no, then I'd go back and figure out, well, how can I find some funding? So case in point, Salt Lake City, our district, a lot of refugees were coming into our state, and they were coming into our district because of housing and IRC and CCS working with us and everything. And so I had continued to put forth, we did our best that we could. And I kept putting forth programs or, things like that I thought would be much more supportive and beneficial. And so I finally got to the point where I presented the case, and I guess they were either tired of me asking, that they allowed me to create the Tumaini Center, which is our Welcome and Transitioning Center. So that became such it was a successful model in that it embraced all the community people, and it helped with the educational attainment for our students. And, it was everybody working on it together. And so it was, and this was probably a journey of about maybe, 10 years. But I was really excited when in 2018, we were awarded the national best practice for working with refugees and the students and their families. And so, but it's like, we say, like Kaying said, we see no, but it's like somebody might say no and think, okay, well, what do I need to do differently? And the other part I wanted to talk about is this, now that I'm not in a public institution, I can be on the Hill during the legislative session. And that was so frustrating, because all of the things that we work for or that we embrace in multicultural education, DEI work, it's being targeted not only in Utah, but across the nation. And that's what I'm seeing. And so it's like when we're looking at a Western world philosophy, a lot of times too, we have to keep that in mind. And how do we straddle our own cultural background, our traditions and values, and how do we make sense out of that and feel good about who we are, in our space and everything. And I just find right now in this environment, sometimes it can be really detrimental to us. And that's where it takes these kinds of spaces for us to get together. So, I mean, I love the analogy of the choir. We need to find people who are we're preaching to the choir, so to speak, but in that space, we can learn to harmonize together so that we build ourselves up. And so it refreshes us and it invigorates us to go forward and continue doing the work. And so finding those spaces where, we're with like-minded people and rejuvenating ourselves is a key piece. That's part of our self-care too, is to be able to participate in those spaces.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that we can move on to some questions from the audience. We have lots of positive, feedback about your amazing answers. This one attendee asks, says, thank you for sharing your stories with us, first of all. And then you mentioned that you're doing this work to help benefit the next generations. Since there's such cultural reverence for elders, what advice do you have for the next generation as they think about potential leadership opportunities without wanting to seem disrespectful to those elders? Who would like to take the question?
So I'll go first, if that, because that's always, for us, that's always, we want to bring up our OPO, our youth, because we know that we're getting to that point too. And so we're always trying to, somebody mentioned, mentorship programs, mentor programs, bringing them into that space. And it starts at a young age too. So in a lot of our community activities, we encourage the families to come, because when the young children see their parents and their grandparents and aunties and uncles involved in it, then it creates that wanting to participate. And I know in the Native Hawaiian culture, as a youth, you might be your job is to sit at the feet of the kupuna and listen to them, but there's going to be that time when you'll be the one at the table and others are at your feet listening. And so in certain spaces, we might be a little bit more rigid, well, not rigid, but more traditional in certain spaces, and in other areas, not as much, but we're always trying to bring everybody together and making sure that there are others that will take our places. I mean, we have to, otherwise, all the work that Kaying has done, and even you, Michelle, everybody else, we need to have others coming in to fill those spaces as well.
Absolutely. Kain, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I do. I don't know if this happens in other communities. I'm sure it does, but I think language access is really a barrier for full participation from our elders. And so what I ask is that young people learn your own language, your native language.
Yeah.
And so for like Hmong, I know we're losing the oral tradition, and a lot of Hmong are young people can't speak their own language. But at the same time, we can't speak English very well either, right? And so this is where Charlene might agree with me, is that native language and heritage language learning in a public school is really important. And so we're advocating for not only ethnic studies, but heritage language programs, so that, you know, communities can learn, children can learn their own language so that they communicate with their elders, their grandparents, and or community leaders who are elders. So I would say not to lose the cultural skills and language that you have. There's a lot of, you know, gender injustices in that, but I think we as, you know, feminist Asian American women can really change that as well too, without really leaning too far in one way or the other, right? And so I would say that that's one advice that I would give. The second advice is that even though I'm becoming a young elder, I do feel like I don't have the wisdom that our elders did, because I do live a privileged life. And so I'm always, you know, thinking a lot about like, what is the wisdom I'm going to transfer over to younger generation? And I don't know what that is, but I want to admit that I'm struggling with that as well too, because the elders haven't let go completely. And then we haven't been, you know, elevated to that level either. And so I think that this is a generation of like, what to do, right? And so an area that I'm grappling with constantly.
Thank you. Great answer. This question came in from the chats. What tips do you have when facing imposter syndrome in work and in school? Which I think is, unfortunately, I don't want people to have imposter syndrome, but I think a lot of women do, right? I know that I often, you know, live with it as well.
You know, I think I did know what that meant a long time ago. And so I always lean to my lived experience, because my lived experience, you know, it can't be negated, right? I mean, in the old days, we didn't have Google or internet to quickly find the data. You really had to do your research to find data to support whatever anecdotes that you have. And in a data-driven world, lived experiences and our anecdotes are not hard data. And so we really had to do the research to do that. But I also found that storytelling, lifting up the lived experience is also valid. And so for me, if the majority of my communities have similar experiences as me, that's data, right? You know what I mean? So for the imposter syndrome, I do think that that's probably, I would say, always think about your community and not just you, because you're there on behalf of your community if you're working in the nonprofit sector. And so even if you don't know enough, you should lift up your community story to say, I may not live that experience, but I know the numbers of people who are you know, experiencing those kinds of challenges, and we want, you know, policies to address these challenges. And so for me, it's always hunting it back to my community and centering my community. And so that's how I usually deal with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I could answer that, I know we're almost out of time too, but I wanted to just say,
Yeah.
sometimes one of the, with that imposter phenomenon or syndrome or whatever, I had a dear friend who said, you need to have a picture of yourself with your award, you know, and so when you doubt yourself, and so in my office, even right here at home, I still have that. You know, it's not that there's other awards and everything, but every once in a while, when you start doubting your worth, or you start doubting, you know, your talents or your skills, that is something I think that could help out. And I know we all have we have mental health struggles and things like that, but it really is helpful that way. And then I just want to say, as far traditionally as a Native Hawaiian or in our indigenous cultures, we believe so strongly on our ancestors that they are with us every single day, all the time. So I look to that as well, to call down or call out to my ancestors to be there. And I think sometimes we have to look at that spiritual self too, to help us through some of the really hard times.
Absolutely. Thank you. If I could add a little bit on this one too, because, yeah, we all live within, well, I do. I live with imposter syndrome sometimes. And one tactic that I use is that, my parents conditioned me so much on competition, right? Comparing yourself to others, which can be negative. But sometimes for me, it helps me in overcoming imposter syndrome, because I think about a certain person who, maybe had like less good grades than me or didn't do as well as me here, but they can do this job. Then I'm like, well, I can do this job too. This person can do it. I can do it. I think like putting a sort of a metric on it that way has really, really helped me. Can we sneak in one more question, or do you think we're out of time, team?
I'm fine. It's up
One
to
more,
you.
good. Okay, so this came up in the chat as well. What suggestions would you have for-profit business organizations to develop APIA team members for leadership positions? What are some resources available for developing effective mentorship programs that you would recommend?
Yeah,
Charlene, would you like to, either one can, jump in.
Kaying, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. I actually wanted to address that because usually the times that for-profit organizations invite us to speak is Asian American Heritage Month. And I'm often surprised at the numbers of Asian Americans working for banks or corporations, and they know very little, or they do not have access to the information that we as nonprofit leaders have. For example, someone put down AAPI data, the data that we have on Asian Americans. So I do think that, perhaps, the for-profit sector needs to work more closely with nonprofit like OCA National or CRAC or AJC or others, so that we can mentor some of these folks in this area. And I know that LEAP in Los Angeles does that, but I think we need that kind of partnership more, so that we can help mentor some of the people in the corporate sector, because they need to be armed with this kind of information as well too, so that whatever they're doing on the inside of corporations can also positively impact the Asian American community, and they can bring their whole self when they bring data and our stories and our social justice lens into the corporations, right? And so I think it's a really great partnership, and I hope that whoever is in the corporate sector could consider that. For example, I started my consulting firm after I left my job because I was so overwhelmed, like everyone else, from the pandemic, but mostly my job at the Capitol. And I've been coaching some of the younger folks in the nonprofit sector, and it's been amazing for me. I hope it's amazing for them as well too. But we are a resource to a lot of people, and like I said again, we need to value nonprofit leaders, because I think nonprofit leaders work very well with limited resources and are always community centered, right? Or mostly community centered, and thinking about the long-term impacts of the movement. And so I think this is a great way to integrate that into the profit sector.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thank you.
So, Michelle, I'm just going to go ahead and answer.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah, please do.
I was reading through the comments, and somebody used the word gaslighting. I just want to say this is trivia, but in 2022, that was the most looked up word. It was unbelievable. So if you don't know what gaslighting is, go for it, read it and understand it, because that really goes in with what we were just talking about with the imposter syndrome and everything. But I do want to say mentorship is a program that we have been really looking at in the Pacific Islander community. And we have started partnering with, just like Kaying said, with an organization, like a bank or whatever. And then we have a Pacific Islander Chamber of Commerce as well, that we're looking at building partnerships, so that not just with our young, not with just our high school kids, but all, a partnership or mentorship program of all types, so that they feel, once again, it's feeling comfortable with it and knowing what to expect. And so that's a key piece. We know, I think what we have in education with a mentor for high school students is working, we've done that a lot easier, because we know that the research shows that if that young person has at least one caring adult who checks in with them at least once a week, it's just once a week at least, that we know that the trajectory for that student is much higher and more successful. and not just getting out of high school, graduate for high school, but the post-secondary world. So if we can take that knowledge and transfer that into the corporate world too, in other arenas. So is it easy to do? Not necessarily, but it's certainly a challenge, and it's a worthwhile challenge. So that's something we are looking at. And every time we have a community get together or whatever, we do a needs assessment. That's always one of our number one priorities too, is mentorship programs.
Wow, thank you, Charlene. And with that, I know we're a little bit past our time, but it has been such a wonderful discussion. It's been such a gift to hear from both of you, amazing, amazing leaders. So I want to thank our panelists again, Charlene Louie and Kai-Ying Yang, and our amazing OCA staff, Lady Marie Bulilan and Hannah Wong, and also OCA National President Linda Ng for being here. Thank you to all of you for being here. And please, I know that maybe there was a call to action that we wanted to add in the comments. If there is, yeah, please add it. OCA team, I'll leave it to you and pass it over to whoever needs to take it over.
Well, thank you.
Linda, yeah, sorry.
I am back. I am back. Well, I just want to thank everyone for joining this month's OCA National Conversation webinar. For anyone who missed tonight's webinar, we'll be posting the recording on our YouTube channel, OCA National. Lady, I think you're going to share a flyer about our next month webinar. Is that right?
Yep, give me 1 second.
Yeah, okay. So bear with us. Yeah.
Is that showing? Hold on. There we go.
Oh, nice.
Wow, that's very nice. Now, our next OCA National Conversation Series will be on April 25th, same time, 7:30 Eastern Standard Time, PM. So this month's webinar is entitled Sustaining Our People and Our Land, where we celebrate the Earth Day by discussing where and how environmental sustainability and AAPI advocacy intersect. So please join us in another fruitful conversation next month. And be sure to follow our social media on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to stay updated. And check out ocanational.org for more information. Now, again, this National Conversation Series is to get folks ready for our 50th National Convention happening July 12th through 16th this summer. Registration is now open. You can find it online, OCA National. So be sure to head to the OCA National Convention, okay, for more. So you will enjoy it, and thank you. Good night.
Good night.